You listen to me. This is my territory now. You step out of line, and you won't see the light of day.
February 14th, 1933. Just before dawn. Cotton Club basement, West 142nd. Street Harlem. Bumpy Johnson stood alone beneath a single bare bulb, swinging slowly from a wire. 12 men formed a wide arc. Around him, guns raised, safeties off, fingers resting on triggers. The closest man stood less than 3 steps away. The farthest, no more than 6. The room was sealed, no windows, no back door. Only one narrow staircase behind him, leading up into darkness. No one spoke the common. Air was still heavy with oil and old liquor. Tommy, the executioner, stood directly in front of him. Shoulders, square weapon, steady Dutch. Schultz sends his regards. He said flatly, no one laughed, no one shifted their stance, because everyone believed the outcome was already decided. A man surrounded in a basement does not walk out. Bumpy Johnson did not raise his hands, he did not turn toward the stairs, he did not look for cover. He looked at each face, one by one, slowly, deliberately, counting without moving. That's all he sent, he asked. Tommy tightened his jaw. 5 seconds to beg, he said. You're making a mistake, Bumpy replied quietly. You're alone, Tommy answered. Then shoot, Bumpy said and did not blink. The silence that followed was longer than expected, heavier than the men holding guns in that silence. Something irreversible began to move. What happened in the next moments would end a war before it started, shift power without a treaty, and redraw the invisible borders of Harlem forever. To understand why that silence in the basement mattered, you have to go back to Harlem in the early years of the Depression. The neighborhood was crowded, tired and broke. Factories had closed, port jobs disappeared, rent stayed the same, money did not. Most families lived week to week, sometimes day to day. Cash was rare credit, meaningless. Banks were not trusted, and the law did not protect black residents. In that environment, survival depended on informal systems. The most important of those systems was the numbers racket. Small bets placed every morning, slips folded and passed. Hand to hand, a few coins carried the promise of relief, if luck turned the right way. The numbers were not a vice. They were a lifeline. Grocery money, rent money, school, shoes. The entire neighborhood moved on that rhythm. When a fiver runner was robbed, there was no police report. When a banker cheated, there was no courtroom order. Existed only if someone could enforce it without uniforms or badges. Madame Stephanie St. Clair did that. From the top, she controlled routes, schedules, payouts, discipline. She did not carry a gun, she carried authority. Runners depended on her, shop owners trusted her, bettors followed her rules. Because payouts arrived on time, her operation needed one thing: certainty that money would come back when taken. That certainty was Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was not presented as a legend in those years. He was a function. He solved problems. When runners disappeared, he found them. When money vanished, it returned. When police leaned too hard on a business, that pressure stopped. Sometimes with a conversation, sometimes with a transfer order, sometimes with quiet consequences. People did not talk about how he did it. They talked about results. Some feared him, some relied on him, many needed him. He did not give speeches, he did not boast, he listened more than he spoke. His reputation grew because disputes ended after he arrived, not before. Bumpy had spent time in prison earlier in his life, and used that time to read. He studied language, history, law, enough to understand how systems worked. He learned that fear alone produced resistance, but predictability produced stability. People did not have to love you. They had to know what would happen next. At the same time, north of Harlem in the Bronx, another system was under pressure. Dutch Schultz had built his wealth during Prohibition. Trucking, alcohol, bribing officials. killing competitors. When prohibition began to fade, so did his income streams. He needed a replacement. Harlem looked ideal. Cash, heavy, unprotected, fragmented by race and ignored by city power. He did not see a community. He saw revenue. Dutch sent representatives south, men with clean suits and calm voices. They met Madame St. Clair in her territory at a club on 133rd Street. They offered partnership framed as protection. The message underneath was simple: pay tribute or be removed. Madame St. Clair refused immediately. She did not raise her voice. She did not negotiate. When the emissaries turned toward Bumpy Johnson standing in the room, he did not respond. He did not nod. He did not threaten. He looked at them until the silence answered for him. That moment carried north with the emissaries and landed on Dutch Schultz's desk. He did not react publicly. He did not send gunmen the same night he planned. He called a private meeting. Trusted lieutenants only, no outsiders. A wooden table, a map of Harlem laid flat, streets, marked numbers, routes circled. The plan was direct. Remove the problem. Remove the problem. Structure collapses. Bumpy Johnson was identified as the hinge, not Madame St. Clair, not the runner's hem. The location was chosen for containment. A basement, a single exit, no witnesses. The force was overwhelming enough to leave no doubt. The men selected had reputations. Violence was their language, and they believed the plan was airtight. There was confidence in the room, not excitement. Calm assurance that the job would be completed quietly, while that plan solidified. Bumpy Johnson learned of it through channels that never appeared in police files. A word passed quietly. The information was exact, the day, the place. The method: he did not convene a meeting. He did not gather allies. He did not warn Madame St. Clair. His behavior did not change on the surface. He continued his routines, walking the neighborhood, speaking with shop owners, handling disputes, but small details shifted. He lingered at corners. He studied entrances. He listened more than usual. People who knew him noticed nothing obvious, only that his eyes paused. Longer on certain doors, on certain faces. The night approached. Harlem continued its rhythm. Numbers collected, slips folded, money counted. No sirens, no warnings, no public signs of the collision forming beneath the surface. Then, before dawn, Bumpy Johnson walked toward the Cotton Club basement alone, carrying no visible weapon, and stood under a single swinging bulb where two systems believed they would decide the future of Harlem in a few quiet minutes. The meeting took place behind a locked door on Arthur Avenue, a social club closed to outsiders. The windows covered, the lights low. 7 men in the room, all seated. Dutch Schultz at the head of the table. Calm expression, coffee untouched. Map of Harlem spread, flat wood edges worn from use. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. This was business, not anger. Dutch spoke first. Harlem brings in more cash every morning than 3 Bronx routes combined, he said. Unprotected money is wasted money. One man, to his right, asked about resistance. Dutch pointed at a name written once in pencil. Bumpy Johnson. That is, the resistance remove him, and the rest folds. The proposal was clean. Overwhelming force. No witnesses, no escape, no second attempt. Required 1 bullet is cheaper than a war. Another man asked about timing. Dutch answered before dawn. When the streets are empty and the runners are asleep. A third man asked about location. Dutch slid a finger to a mark near West 142nd Street, the Cotton Club basement, single staircase, no windows, storage room known to Johnson, used by him, comfortable territory for him, which made it the perfect place because comfort creates predictability. 12 men were selected not because 12 were needed, but because excess sends a message. Each man in the room understood. that this was meant to be final. Not just a killing, but a signal to Harlem that resistance ended here. Tommy the Executioner was named leader, not because he was the smartest, but because he was the most direct. His history was known. Close work, no hesitation, no speeches. Dutch set the boundary conditions. No shooting upstairs, no bodies on the street, no witnesses. Everything ends below ground. Then he gave the final instruction. Bring me proof, and left the room confident that nothing unexpected would occur at the same time. In Harlem, Bumpy Johnson continued his routine. He walked past shops, nodded to owners, spoke briefly to runners. He visited a bookmaker whose nephew had been taken in by where. Police the problem was solved by afternoon. He ate alone that night and listened more than he spoke. People around him felt a tension they could not name. Not fear, but focus. A man preparing without announcing it. Late that night, a black Cadillac rolled slowly through Harlem, its windows down. One man inside said nothing, just observed routes, entrances, light patterns. The car passed the Cotton Club twice and disappeared. No one followed it. Back in the club, a bartender locked up, unaware that his basement had already been chosen as a battlefield before dawn. The 12 men arrived in 2 vehicles. They did not speak as they entered. They moved down the stairs. First secured the space, checked the staircase, tested the bulb. One man suggested removing it. Tommy said, "Leave it, light calms people." They positioned themselves in a shallow arc, backs to walls, guns angled inward. They believed surprise was total. Minutes later, footsteps approached the stairs alone. Unhurried, Bumpy Johnson descended without pausing. He did not scan wildly. He did not hesitate at the last step. He entered fully into the room and stopped beneath the bulb. Eyes adjusting hands, visible, empty. That was the moment when the plan was supposed to end. Instead, it stalled. Tommy spoke. The line Dutch had approved, "Dutch Schultz sends his regards." Bumpy answered with a question not in the plan. That's all. He sent the men exchanged, quick glances. This was not the response expected. Tommy moved to the next line, 5 seconds to beg. Bumpy replied that a mistake was being made. Alone was spoken back. And then came the phrase that was never rehearsed. Then shoot. In that instant, the structure of the plan fractured, not because it failed, but because it waited. The men had trained for motion, not for pause. Fingers tightened, breaths shortened. No one wanted to be the first to fire in a room where sound would ricochet and bullets could return from the dark. That hesitation was the flaw no one accounted for, because no one believed Bumpy Johnson would create. And as the seconds stretched, the advantage quietly shifted upstairs. 4 men stood near the basement door. They did not move. They did not speak. They waited for a sound that never came inside the basement. The rhythm belonged to the man who was supposed to die, and outside Harlem slept unaware that the outcome had already been decided by a silence no one planned for. The room was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not the calm before a storm, but the pause. After something had already shifted, 12 men stood with guns raised, fingers tight, breath shallow. The bulb swung once more, casting light, then shadow, then light again. Bumpy Johnson did not move. His hands stayed. Low his shoulders, loose his eyes. Steady on the center man, Tommy the Executioner took half a breath and opened his mouth to repeat the order. And that was when Bumpy moved 1 step forward, less than 2 paces from the nearest gun. The distance closed too fast for anyone to adjust. His fist rose in a short, tight arc and struck the glass. The bulb shattered instantly. Light vanished. The wire snapped, and darkness fell complete. And sudden shots, fired immediately, not in sequence, not in control. The first Blast went high. Another hit wood. A third tore into a crate. The sound bounced hard off the walls. Men shouted not commands but warnings. "Hold fire!" someone yelled. Too late. Fear does not listen. In darkness, boots scraped, bodies collided, guns flashed without aim. Bumpy did not run. He stepped 3 paces left, then 1 back, keeping the wall at his shoulder. He knew the room, the tables, the crates, the gaps. He felt air move when a man passed close, and turned his body just enough to let a bullet miss his chest. A shape rushed him blind. He dropped his weight and drove an elbow into a throat. Breath cut off with a dry sound. The body fell and did not rise. Another shot rang out, and a man screamed, hit by his own. Sighed, the noise made others fire again. Bumpy moved again, 4 steps toward the staircase, counting by feel, not sight. He heard a man stumble near the rail and cut the angle, reaching the bottom of the stairs, as another body blocked the path A. Straight punch, landed on a jawbone, cracked the man, fell, backward into the others, creating a pile. Confusion stacked on confusion. Guns fired downward, now upward, anywhere but true. Tommy shouted again for order, but his voice was lost under echo in panic seconds. Passed heavy and fast. Sweat burned eyes, smoke filled lungs. The floor became slick with spilled liquor and blood. Someone dropped a gun, metal rang sharp. Bumpy stepped over it and pressed himself flat against the wall, reading position by sound and breath. He waited 1 beat, then moved again when the firing slowed to scattered single shots, then silence broken by coughing and groans. The door above opened. Light spilled down the stairs, revealing bodies across the floor. Not all dead, all broken by chaos. 1 man, still conscious, sat against the wall, gasping hands, shaking, eyes wide. He did not see Bumpy Johnson, because Bumpy was already gone upstairs. 4 men stepped aside, unlocked the door, and watched him pass, without a word, inside the 2. Basement. The survivor crawled toward the stairs, inch by inch, pain visible in every movement. Outside, dawn spread across Harlem, quiet and ordinary. The survivor reached the street and flagged a cab, blood on his coat. Voice thin, he gave an address and collapsed inside. The ride ended at Arthur Avenue, where Dutch Schultz sat at breakfast reading the paper. He looked up once, took in the blood, and asked, "Where are the others?" The answer came slow and flat. "All of them? He let me live." Dutch stood without hurry. Asked why to deliver a message, the survivor placed a card on. "The table and ace of spades stained dark Harlem is not for sale. And if you send more men, send more cards. He is collecting a deck." Dutch stared at the card longer than he ever stared at a target. Then he nodded once, burned it, and said, "We are done in Harlem." The reaction began before the sun fully cleared the buildings on West 142nd Street. Inside the basement, men who could still move tried to stand and failed. Others lay silent, breathing shallow blood, pooling beneath them. Smell of gunpowder and liquor mixed heavy in the air. Upstairs, the club owner locked the door and did not open it again. That morning, no police were called. No ambulances arrived. Word moved faster, without sirens. It moved by whispers, by runners, by bartenders, by drivers who saw 1 man crawl out of a place where many had gone in within hours. Harlem knew that Dutch Schultz had sent men, and that those men had not returned the way they were supposed to on the street. Shop owners opened later than Flott. Usual, they stood in doorways watching faces. Runners paused. Before moving slips, money was still collected. But more carefully, more quietly, people spoke in low voices, not out of panic but calculation. Something had shifted, and everyone was trying to measure it inside. The underworld, the message landed hard, not because bodies were found, but because war did not follow. Dutch Schultz did not send another crew. He did not retaliate publicly. He did not deny what happened. His silence confirmed it within days. Meetings were held in back rooms across the city. Men with money and territory reviewed maps and routes and decided what not to touch. The 5 families discussed Harlem not as a target, but as a boundary. Lines were redrawn without ink. No announcements, no agreements, just absence of pressure. Bookmakers adjusted operations routes were shortened. Runners were told which streets were safe and which were not. Violence dropped, not because men became moral, but because consequences became predictable. A crew entering Harlem without invitation now understood what that meant. The community felt the change quickly. Stores that had been paying multiple layers of protection paid one or none. Disputes that once ended with knives ended with conversations. Bumpy Johnson did not make speeches. He did not declare victory. He walked the neighborhood the same way he always had, stopping to talk, listening more than speaking. When conflicts arose, he handled them early, quietly. Before weapons came out, people who depended on the numbers system trusted that payouts would continue, and they did. The system stabilized because the hinge held for Dutch Schultz. The decision ended his expansion south. He turned his attention elsewhere, chasing money that required less resistance. It did not save him. Years later, his own circle fractured, and he was killed far from Harlem. When news reached the neighborhood, there was no celebration, no surprise, only confirmation that the balance set that night had held others. Learned from it, Luciano chose negotiation where Dutch had chosen force alliances, replaced invasions. Harlem remained intact, not because it was feared, but because it was understood. Bumpy Johnson aged in place. His hair turned gray, his pace slowed, but his presence remained steady. Police knew his name, but cases failed. Witnesses did not speak, and juries did not believe in stories that lacked proof. He attended funerals, paid hospital bills, mediated arguments between men who would otherwise kill each other. His power was not loud. It did not require reminders. And then there was the lesson not spoken, not written, never explained directly. Power was not about firing first. It was about controlling the moment when no one else could act. Power was about understanding when violence ended a problem and when it multiplied. One man had entered a basement, surrounded, and left without starting a war. That was the difference. Killing would have demanded retaliation, and humiliation ended it. The rule changed quietly and stayed changed. 5 years later, the city had moved on. Headlines changed, alliances shifted, names rose and fell, but Harlem remained steady. Dutch Schultz was gone. His empire fractured and absorbed elsewhere. His ambition ended far from the streets he once tried to take. Madam Stephanie St. Clair continued her operation for years longer, adapting to pressure without ever surrendering control. She did not speak publicly about the night in the basement, but her routes stayed open, her payouts stayed clean, and her authority stayed intact. Bumpy Johnson remained a constant presence. He walked slower, but with the same posture. Calm eyes, measured steps. People still depended on him. Some feared him, some trusted him. Many needed him. He did not expand territory. He did not chase attention. He kept order by showing up early and leaving quietly. 10 years later, new players entered the city with louder voices and bigger guns. They learned quickly which lines not to cross. Harlem was not easy money. It required permission, understanding, and restraint. The ace of spades, once framed in Bumpy Johnson's office, disappeared after his death. Some said it was buried. Some said it was burned. Others said it was kept by someone who understood what it represented. Not luck, not death, but control. The ability to stop when you could go. Further, The night in the basement was not remembered for the shots fired. It was remembered for the war. That never happened. A dozen men entered a closed room. One walked out, and the neighborhood stayed whole. If this story showed you what real power looks like, hit subscribe and stay with us for the moments history leaves in the dark. And now, ask yourself honestly, if you were standing in that room surrounded and silent, would you pull the trigger? Or would you wait and let the moment bend to you?